Hello all. My self-imposed brief for this one then is simply a slim wall cabinet above the bench to store the oversized tools I recently acquired from Banggood. This hung to a T-square and this large 16-inch triangle. As with my recent workshop builds, I'm only going to be using plywood and timber that would otherwise be scrap or firewood. And I want it to have a sliding rather than hinged door so that if I have a piece of furniture on the bench, I can still access the tools within without having to move anything. Turned out a bit of a win and a fail this one, so here's how it went together. Starting with ripping a load of rips of ply, some 9mm, some 12. This is all from the same batch of scraps I made the very lean workshop cabinet from, for which I have a 2-part build video, and this step stool. Again, a build there's a video for. Surprisingly, I still have some left, even after those and this wall unit, showing how far constructing from rips can make your material stretch, I guess. Unlike the other builds where I could salvage appropriate lengths, for this one, shorter pieces will have to be laminated together to give usable lengths, joints all staggered of course. Having been ripped apart and kicked about for a while, I clean each face up with a quick sand before gluing. Liberal coat of glue on just one face, then slap the alternating pieces together. I pop a couple of small screws in each piece just to stop it squirming under clamping. I glue and screw all the lengths, then clamp them all as one. It would just take too many clamps and too much space doing them all individually. With all those dry, I trim all the lengths. My miter saw is still MIA and I'm not really missing it. I have just enough lengths, by the way, to make a box perimeter and a couple of lengths to hang tools off inside. There'll be no back on it. I mark and pre-drill for the screws. Then a lick of glue, though not really needed, and I can screw the basic box together. The piece laying flat inside the box walls is for a little rigidity and for wall hanging. Like I said, there's no back on the box, as when hung, that job will be done by the wall itself. So that's the box frame done then. I leave it overnight with a couple of squares clamped to it to try and pull it into a more square shape as the glue cures. A lot of these rips had a bit of a twist and were not behaving very well. Here then are some more planks of spalted elm I saved from being firewood. I've used them a fair bit around the shop. I did have plans to do something more interesting with them, but spalting and strong figure doesn't really suit my furniture, I think. I did try one piece out on a little side table, but I just think my pieces tend to lend themselves to a more clean grain. These planks have been in my store for around 6 years. Some great figure in them, but odd shapes and lots of cavities, holes and cracks. Hence why here I'm filling the voids with epoxy to get the most out of what's there. Couple days later, resin cured, time to process the planks into thin strips. I've already given them a flat slide on the planer some time ago, but here I'm trimming off to expose about 20mm of solid wood each side. Then I can rip in earnest. They're all about 21 or 22mm square at this stage. You get some idea of the mountain to work through stacked on the left there. So here's what I end up with, and I'm sorting through the rips, finding an arrangement to make the panels I need for the sliding door. Not bothering with aesthetic matches or anything, just what will fit where, giving me a good staggering of joints. Then a drop of glue and mate the pieces together. Where the end grain's butt, I'm not bothering with glue, just putting it on the long grain sides. And you know what inevitably follows, using every clamp into place to make panels. Panels for the door all glued up. It unfortunately became obvious I didn't have quite enough for the size cabinet I'd made from the ply rips. So first job was narrowing the cabinet a bit. Even though the frame was glued as well as screwed, as it was all kind of end grain, it separated easy enough. A pain to have to do it, but I way overestimated how much usable rips I'd get from those elm planks. Back to the door, the pieces get trimmed. I should mention here that they went through the thicknesser after gluing, but I didn't film it. Here's the door laid out and getting marked for a loose tenon and each corner numbered to avoid any alignment issues. Not having a domino, I utilised the 10-minute workshop jig again. Perfectly executed dodgy balancing act with a massive router on a 40 by 20mm piece of timber there. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed there's a big hole in the door. This will be covered by some perspex I've also had hanging around for years. Good tip for cutting perspex, or plastic more generally, is to drop the speed of your blade. This should give you a clean cut where a high speed will create melting and pretty messy edges. I'm not really a fan of clear perspex or cupboards you can see into, but as always with my workshop builds, it's about utilising only scraps, offcuts or unwanted materials. I do buy stuff for the workshop furniture, but it tends to be hardware, wheels, vices and stuff like that. The width of the sheet is only just wide enough, another reason for narrowing the frame a bit earlier. That's some pretty dizzying figure jumping out with a bit of wax applied. Screwed in place, that's the door done. For the sliding door mechanism, I'm using one of these linear rails. I had a pair 1 metre long I used on my first iteration of a sliding table saw carriage. I don't really like these round bar type though. The bearings just aren't solid enough. They can cost upwards of £30 a pair at this length. Cut in half, this is about as good a use as I can think for them, but in my opinion too rubbish for anything more serious. First one squared and screwed in, the second one gets a bit of double triple checking before screwing in. I mean, it doesn't have to be CNC perfect, but the more in line they are, the less you'll have to fight them to open and close the door. Approaching the finish line, it's about making recesses for the bearing blocks top and bottom now. Bit fiddly but needs must. This is one of those tasks that probably could have been avoided had I given the build some thought beyond just seeing what material I can dig out and letting that guide what I make. But then everything I make normally is so designed down to the very last detail that sometimes, in a situation like this, it's enjoyable to just wing it and see what happens. Another little detail on one side, top and bottom, is a little channel for the rail to run through. It can be brought together for a test fit now. One step I missed out here was adding the risers and drilling the screw holes for the bearing blocks. You haven't really missed much, just a whole lot of measuring and remeasuring and marking. After all that, I kid you not, every screw found the bearing block first time. It helped my mood somewhat, as this supposedly quick job was taking too long and getting in the way of actual work happening in the workshop at the same time. But I've started, so I'll finish. So you can see what's happening, there's a bearing housed in the cabinet frame top and bottom. The rail, attached to the back of the door, slides through those fixed bearings, as you can see through the window there. Round the side, behind the door, you can see the channels I cut, allowing the rails through. In for a penny, in for a pound at this point, I added this strip of wood to each facing side of the frame to close the gap a little between the door. The rails themselves close the gap top and bottom. Then, as per my other recent workshop builds, the ply frame gets a whitewash. After which I can lay out the tools and see where to add a couple of final ply strips to support them. These got glued and screwed the same as the frame itself. These holes I drilled at 9mm for the M10 thread on the T-square drill guide bushes. This allows me to screw them in, a 10mm hole, and they would just keep falling out. When I had the tools laid out, I marked for nail holes. These I pre-drill and angle. On the nails for the aluminium tools, like the Hongdui T-square, I tightly wrap them in some electrical tape to stop them getting dinged. Quick check with everything in place. Then I can finally put the thing together for real and get it hung on the wall. I'm fairly happy with the result. It keeps those large tools safe yet accessible. The sliding door will tuck behind the hinge rail when it's up, and if there's a piece of furniture or something being worked on the bench, I don't have to move it to access the tools in the cupboard, which I would do if it was a hinge door. Doesn't quite slide as well as I'd like though. This is down to my only using one bearing block, which gives the door a slight droop at either extreme. I have two more bearing blocks and, as you can see, just enough room to fit them. This will fix, or at least minimise the droop. I've too much going on to fix this right now, but in a week or two I'll get round to it. I also had to add an aluminium bearer for the bottom rail inside the cabinet. As my chairs feature aluminium components, I'm not really short of alley plate. I did try a wood bearer first, but the steel rail just started eating it away. So it's going to be great having these gauges and layout tools right there at the bench. I'm also really pleased that, despite being a fairly janky build, there's no visible mechanism, even if it does need a few finishing touches like an extra bearing block. Keeping mechanisms discreet, I think, is always a nice challenge. If doubling up the blocks smooths out the door action, I'd like to make another very similar one for my chisels, rasps, files and saws, all of which I still keep in tool rolls. I'll stick it where those cubbies are at the back. Honestly, I hate those things, they're just dust traps. Couple other workshop jobs for using up scraps is a wheeled base to raise the bandsaw table up to bench height. Should be fun as I only have two pairs of different size casters left. I also need to redo my template rack as I have a bunch more templates that need hanging now. Something not too dissimilar to my clamp racks, I imagine. Wouldn't hold your breath for any videos on those though. Looks like the cupboard is on the wonk there, doesn't it? It is level though, it's the garage floor that's on the slope, meaning so is the tripod and the benches. Anyways, I hope this, like the other recent workshop builds, has given you some more ideas to utilise the scraps you might have lingering around. Comments or questions welcome below. Please like if you did, sub if you aren't already, and as ever, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.